I mean, most of you probably will have met him before, because I guess that's why you're here. But Jon is someone who is almost always irrepressibly upbeat, sometimes annoyingly so. He invests in others. He creates incredible opportunities for students and for colleagues. I think that's something that you probably wouldn't necessarily see at events. We're always behind the scenes doing lots of work. It looks like Jon's the star of the show at the front. But actually, he gives us and creates incredible opportunities. He builds community, all of you guys, and he innovates constantly, also sometimes annoyingly. But he really is an innovator. He's a big fan of certain tech leaders. I won't name them, sponsors and all that. He looks beyond traditional boundaries of academia to form lasting partnerships. Again, many of you in the audience are evidence of that. And he has created a virtuous circle that mutually benefits all those involved. And incredibly, he does this as an historian, not an entrepreneur, as you think. Well, an entrepreneur, I'd say he is. But he is a historian, and he does all of that under that guise. I'll stop there for now so others can contribute to that. But before we get to the main event, I wanted to tell you about a project that we've been working on in the Strand Group in the Policy Institute at King's. Some of you may know that we've been running events for 2 decades, but we've also been teaching hundreds of students over that same period, sort of behind the scenes if you only come to events. And I can see many former and current students even, I won't ask you to put your hands up, in the audience tonight. Thank you for coming. So teaching basically has always been a core part of what we do. It's been at the heart of our mission, always. We've all had teachers that have changed the direction of our lives, and Jon has been one of mine. And so I'm very excited to tell you that we have launched our very own MA in government studies, and there really is nothing else like it in the country. It's the first of its kind, and it is the result of that 20 years of developing a pioneering approach to the study of British government, both in events, in partnerships, in our own research, in our teaching, honing that, developing, iterating, and now we're so proud to have it in this sort of cohesive whole. But instead of telling you about it, I'll show you it with a short video that gives you a snapshot of what it's all about.
The MA in Government Studies at King's College London offers an unrivalled opportunity to get an insider's view as to how government really works.
The truth is, as I know, if you're a cabinet minister, if you're an advisor of the Treasury, it's not about textbooks and equations. It's not simply about being able to study the past. It's about understanding what's happening in complex ways, learning from the past, and then saying, on that basis, what is the right way forward in that decision for our country.
So we look at policy, what the government of the day is doing and why they're doing it. We also look at process, so how the decision making is happening, the machinery of government, and then we look at personality, so who are the individuals, what shaped them as people, how do they get on.
This MA programme has institutional partnerships with organisations like Number 10 Downing Street and the Treasury. What that means is that classes can take place in buildings like Number 10 Downing Street and the Treasury, but it also means that we have the highest profile guest practitioners come into the classroom and teach alongside our academics to give you an experience of how government really works in practice.
We are really trying to create a very dynamic learning environment. It's in person. You're going to be part of a small cohort, so you really get to know each other, you'll get to know us, and we're excited to be able to leverage our proximity to the heart of government.
The calibre of people you're interacting with is like nothing else you'll ever do. Specific things like going to Downing Street, meeting ex-Prime Ministers, Chancellors, Senior Ministers, etc. But that's what King's does better than anybody else.
It really is the embodiment of knowledge with purpose.
Working really closely with the Treasury, we've had a good 250 different Treasury civil servants come and do our class as part of their job. The Treasury thinks that its current civil servants can learn skills and learn from history in our class.
Our students, having studied British government, find that it's very useful for going into British government. We have students who go on to serve in civil service or to get involved in politics more directly, in business, in government relations, in public policy, in think tanks and in journalism. Ultimately, you're learning a set of skills here that are transferable.
I've got to say, I'd love to have done this class when I was in my 20s. I think it would have really helped me. You see a complete picture of public policy, and we use the lens of history to help us understand the challenges we face today and in the future. I think these are brilliant skills which any politician, policymaker can learn in this class and would really equip them to go on and do those kind of jobs in the future.
Brilliant. So in short, it's all about examining how government works in practice, not how we'd like it to work, but actually how it really actually works, with the practitioners, with us who create research-led modules, and also with the fun. Teaching is our passion and purpose. So applications are live now. So spread the word and get in touch if you'd like to know more. And I'll stop talking now and hand over to Professor Adam Fagan for the formal introduction to our speaker, Professor Jon Davis, OBE.
Thank you, Michelle. This is a great honour for me. It's a real privilege. And I was absolutely honoured and delighted to be asked to be part of this evening's events. I could just talk about Jon's many academic and professional achievements. I could talk about the 2007 PhD, the reform of British central government, 1960 to 74, which was then published by Continuum as the book Prime Ministers and Whitehall. I could mention, for example, that 2010 he was shortlisted for the most innovative teacher by the Times Higher Education for his special subject, the Blair government. I could go on about the fact that when he decided to join us here at King's in 2014, all the things that he has done in that decade. I could mention 2019, the Oxford University Press book, Heroes or Villains. The 2021 historical advisor for BBC Two's 5-part documentary, Blair and Brown, The New Labour Revolution. And of course, I could mention 2022 awarded an OBE for services to history and education in the late Queen's last honours list. And then being awarded, or receiving rather, the OBE in 2023 at Windsor Castle from the Princess Royal, the Chancellor, of course, of the University of London. I'm not good, I could, but I wouldn't be able to say much more than you've already heard about the fantastic new MA for Government Studies that has been very much the brainchild of Jon Davis, and that he has led and will continue to lead so brilliantly. But I actually want to talk about the Jon Davis that I know, the Jon Davis I know, respect and admire. Jon, I believe I taught you as a history undergraduate at QMUL, Queen Mary, University of London, many years ago. I'm not a historian in the politics department, but I think you might have strayed into one of our modules and I might have delivered a lecture. I've never quite probed too much in case I hear things I don't want to hear about my teaching. But that's when we first were acquainted. But I really got to know you when between 2012 and 2019, I was head of the School of Politics and International Relations at Queen Mary. You were leading the Mile End Group and were struggling to get the level of institutional traction with the type of high-impact events and engagements you were delivering. Hard to believe, really, but that was, I think, a fair reflection of the reality. I immediately saw the potential in you and the mission you sought to accomplish. You knew exactly how to capture the interests of students, how to excite them, how to engage them with top politicians and civil servants, and to teach them about networks and how to use them. Your entrepreneurial approach, your downright chutzpah and authenticity, combined with a genuine charm and decency, was not to everyone's liking or their cup of tea, in what was the ivory tower on the Mile End Road. But this, Jon, was their shortcoming, not yours. It was ultimately their conventional attitudes to higher education, rather than your truly progressive approach, that jarred with the university and its students. As the audience tonight will grasp from your lecture, you are, Jon, a true scholar. You're analytical, inquisitive, thoughtful and reflective. You more than languish with the detail. and you articulate verbally and on paper in ways that reach beyond conventional audiences. And you captivate those who only have at best a passing interest in the topic. Indeed, you have made a very significant intellectual contribution to our understanding of the Blair era. But it is most fitting that you are a professor of government education. Say that again. You're a professor of government education. That's where I wanted to put the emphasis. You are a brilliant teacher, Jon. I've attended many Mile End Group and Strand Group events over the years. Not as many as I would have liked to, but I've attended so many that have been quite incredible. I could go on, which I won't do, about some of them. But the most memorable of all was the wonderful event with Neil Kinnock when we were still at Queen Mary. Ending the evening after about 3 bottles of wine with him doing impressions of Len McCluskey, which I think was just fantastic. But I always pay particular attention at these events to the students in the audience, not the prime ministers or the civil servants on the stage. I tend to sort of look away at them. I look at the students. The students, the men, the women, black, white, Asian, are always enthralled. Professor Davis, we are so very fortunate to have you at King's, and I look forward to this evening's inaugural lecture. Congratulations.
A new whistle just for the occasion. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Professor Fagan, for the characteristically generous comments. Welcome. Being made professor means the world to me. I love it. I'm so proud of having chosen this career and feel privileged every day to work in such a magnificent seat of higher education. I think I love it so much partly because I simply did not envisage any of it. I was born in Plaistow in East London, of families whose work was centred upon the Royal Docks, just before that rich chapter of London's history came to an end. And I grew up in the Greater London borough of Havering in Essex. I quite liked school. I was the first in the family to stay on for A-levels, leaving education at 18 to head, as so many others from my Essex Comprehensive School cohort, to the financial services industry. Why did I not seamlessly head to university in the early 90s? I did receive a little encouragement from a teacher or two, but higher education seemed a long way away. It was partly not having family wealth, and you'll recall that 1991 fell in the middle of the early 90s recession. The construction sector was the first to contract, and my dad, Malcolm, he wanted to be mentioned, was made redundant 3 times in 1 year. Redundant 3 times in 1 year. Just think about that. He never gave up, but times weren't easy. I think, however, that it was perhaps even more due to there being no history of higher education and no white-collar role models around me. I was not alone, and out of 180 children who started my secondary school, and I can see at least 2 in the audience, only around 20 ventured to higher education. Let me make it clear that I always had a great deal of admiration for many of my teachers, and I'm happy to say I think a far greater proportion of students there now go to university. And while the school had some tough years in special measures a decade ago, I was so honoured to be asked to be the guest speaker at their prize night a few years back. I did get to Queen Mary and Westfield College, University of London, when I was 20. Dad had begun to suggest I consider it, for I decided that banking was not for me. But that did not stop a yo-yo existence between university and banking, as it felt I was forever saving up for or paying off my studies. As I did my first degree, then went back to banking during summers and after I graduated, before finally leaving the sector for good. working on the trading floors of, among others, Ambrose Bank and JP Morgan, getting into work before dawn to catch the start of the markets, being shouted at for conscientiously not cutting corners with the accounts, like kid you not, and never hitting the salary high notes, and moreover liking words rather than numbers, meant that I cumulatively did not foresee a long-term career in that industry, and led to a rosy-eyed but unfocused view of what the university life was like. My initial experience of academia was less than exhilarating. Not having ever been an A student, though always in attendance and keen in class, continued into university days, and I thought it all fine, was a little disaffected. I think it was partly being threatened on my first day in secondary school at age 11 after being enthusiastic in a lesson that meant I came to live a classic triangulation. Don't fail, but don't succeed, hide any talent. But there was another factor at play that fed a sense of disconnection. Though enjoying much of the teaching at QM, during the second year when thoughts were turning to what came after, I began to feel that my degree was too disparate and unfocused, not practical enough. Purely academic, perhaps. I delivered a respectable 2-1 in history and politics, but did not see anything but a return to banking. I immediately regretted it. I had, however, had a stroke of professional luck. I had a burgeoning belief that while I'd always thought I was clever, I had never proved it academically. I lobbied to be accepted in my final undergraduate year for Professor Peter, now the Lord, Hennessy's legendary module, Cabinet, Premiership and the Conduct of British Central Government since 1945, Cab and Prem to its friends. It was to prove the making of me. The Prof was an almost mythical figure at QM. He was so impressive and took no prisoners regarding underperformance, and once called me out in front of the class after a less than well-researched presentation. I subsequently studied harder than I'd ever done and found that my comprehensive school style of writing, marked down by more classically focused academics, was warmly encouraged by him. Peter made me feel so comfortable in higher education. For the first time I was achieving first-class marks. It was the awakening of my pursuit of excellence. The module Cab and Prem was something else. We still believe that its complex approach is the best way to understanding modern British government. It had Peter's highly engaging personality driving a blend of theory and practice, an unbeatable combination of rigorous research scholarship and in-person guest teaching from figures such as, in my year 1996, the formidable former head of the Joint Intelligence Committee, Sir Percy Craddock, and a visit to number 10 Downing Street for a seminar with the Cabinet Secretary, Sir Robin Butler. A heady brew, I'm sure you'll agree. Incidentally, our students have visited number 10 and seen every Cabinet Secretary since 1992, and this year's trip takes place on Friday. As Professor John Rentoul and Dr. Jack Brown put it in the Independent just this week, and I quote, unique approach is to apply the rigour of historical inquiry to recent events by studying primary sources. And those primary sources include the people who were in the room, where it happened. And it all helps to understand how our nation's government actually works, given the largely unwritten constitution and ability to flex and alter. Ours is a more organic system than others, and so personalities matter more. As good a definition as any, I think. Moreover, Peter made it clear that teaching was every bit as important as research. I could not agree more, and more than once rejected a move further into management to continue in the classroom where I'm happiest. But there was something else. I peppered Peter with questions and theories as I embraced the possibility of a future academic career. I remember one such conversation where we discussed what it was that set Oxford and Cambridge apart. He said, saving his blushes, that the teaching at QM was every bit as good. I therefore deduced that it was all about the prestige and the network. The prestige, I truly believed, was easy to match. Oxford's dreaming spires and Cambridge's punting could be countered by London, from the city to Westminster and Whitehall, how finance connected to government over centuries against a backdrop of culture and history. Wonderful, multidimensional contemplation. But creating a network, now that was much more complicated. The value of being in a relatively small cohort and academics really getting to know students was immeasurable to me. During one of my last Cabin Prem classes, I had worn a West Ham United football sweatshirt. Peter asked me if I ventured out to watch the mighty yet often mediocre Hammers, which I did, and he said that though he had lived in the East End for 25 years, he had not been to the bowling ground, and would I take him sometime? Bought him a scarf, took him to a bleak midwinter game against Leeds, sat him down for the local delicacy of pie mash and liquor. West Ham were bad, Leeds were worse. They still won 2-0, which the Leeds fans celebrated by going shirtless in sub-zero temperature. I thought, that's that, couldn't have gone much worse. He'll not be seen again. But a few weeks later, I got a handwritten note saying how much he had enjoyed the whole experience, right down to him heading home on a bus when an older gent wearing a claret and blue muffler rolled his eyes at the prof in downtrodden solidarity, and that he wanted to go again. He was soon so enamoured that he joined me in a season ticket and announced to the world he was a Hammer in Who's Who. He invited his great friend and at that time permanent Under-Secretary to the Ministry of Defence, Sir Kevin Tebbit, who soon also became a season ticket holder and our first visiting professor. And Peter used what was to him a real taste of working class life as a form of inverse corporate entertainment. The day their friend Professor Simon Sharma joined us home with the three Cambridge graduates singing songs from vaudeville at the back of the Bobby Moore stand, well, I thought we were all going to die. But networks were beginning. During my final 2 years in banking, I got more and more disillusioned, and Peter said, come back to us. I started my master's under him like a train and achieved an overall distinction top mark for the first time. I always said I did not want to peak too early. Subsequently, Peter had a word, and I became a work experience researcher in the Cabinet Office, which led to them sponsoring my doctoral thesis, published in 2007. I was one of 6 PhDs under Peter, including the future Cabinet Secretary, Dr. Simon Case, that were encouraged to join the late and lamented Institute of Contemporary British History seminar series at Senate House, which Peter and Anthony Selden had created in 1986. By the early 2000s, this had broadened away from its political and governmental origins, and after 3 years of regular attendance, I was not alone in wanting something more focused. In late 2003, on the first floor restaurant of the Captain Kidd pub in Wapping, us PhD students decided we would set up our own bespoke government and politics-focused seminar to cater for our needs. Peter was there too, and he said he would back it, but always pointed out how the whole enterprise was student-led. We wanted a seminar which was relevant to the wider world, outward-looking and porous to those not in academia, and lay yet kind of Financial Times quality audience requiring an accessible discourse, but one rooted in heavy-duty scholarship, informed by rigorous academic history. True inclusion was embedded from the very beginning. Well, I gave the first Strand Group lecture in 2004, and having been at every Meg and subsequent Strand Group since, all 178 of them, I must say it's never been quite as good as that first one. I probably set the bar a bit too high. With the title 5 New Research Findings of the Machinery of Government under Edward Heath, you can imagine I sent the capacity crowd of about 12 home wanting more. But the title provided another example for what made this seminar series different. On the surface, a dry topic, but a fascination as to how government works in practice. We invited the recently retired Cabinet Secretary, Lord Wilson of Dinton, to be respondent at the first one. Such was the ambition from the start. He couldn't make it, but offered to be in effect our first VIP guest a few months later. When Peter gave an external lecture quoting at length Wilson's previously unpublished and, for a Cabinet Secretary, somewhat spicy thoughts on the Blair government, the Meg was on the map. Perhaps my favourite event title ever was The Theory and Practice of Writing the Cabinet Minutes, with the then incumbent Cabinet Secretary, Sir Gus O'Donnell, and his legendary predecessor, Lord Armstrong of Ilminster. The seminars got bigger and more complex, and in its 10th year, at the 100th Mile End Group, Tony Blair was the star guest, the first time he had spoken at a UK university since his retirement, on the topic, how government really works. Can't wait to find out, said former Cabinet Secretary Lord Butler of Brockport in his inimitable way. Tonight's event is our 69th at King's, and we now put on fewer events per year than we once did, but they are often now much bigger set-piece affairs. In the past year alone, we've had Lords Michael Heseltine and Ken Clarke, former Security and Intelligence Coordinator and Director of GCHQ, Sir David O'Mann. 2 lectures from the Permanent Secretary of the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, Sarah Munby, and 3 from Professor Ed Balls, one with Lord Macpherson of Earl's Court, another with Michael Gove, and a third as part of the panel to end all panels, according to Politico, featuring a delicious spat between Lord Mandelson and George Osborne. They're all commercially sponsored. The attendees number the hundreds, old and young, students, those currently in situ, the retired, across sectors as diverse as politics, the civil service, the military, the wider public sector, journalism and business. Over 20 years, our events have become as good as anyone's anywhere. Early on in my academic career, I'd been invited to a Cambridge University conference on government. It was huge. Hundreds of attendees with so many famous and infamous faces. The thing I vividly recall was observing the master giving instructions to his students, who would then introduce themselves to the VIPs, what I took as a conveyor belt of privilege. I'd witnessed where the apostolic succession took place, where access to the fabled establishment took effect. But I was not unhappy. I did not want what I thought of as an impervious network smashed for its privilege, exclusion, and elitism. No. I was simply impressed and fascinated, thinking it brilliant. Feeling that I'd never be a part of that one, I dreamt of my own. One that would deliver all the benefits of an elite network, but one that was inclusive and open to all. And I wanted what the generic Oxbridge delivered for my own future students in London. I'm not frightened by fair competition. I simply want a level playing field. 20 years on, the Strand Group is the networking arm of our teaching and research activities, and the network I thought essential is there for all to enjoy and, crucially, join. A significant dimension of this whole story is the financial support from business. Very early on in the Meg's life, Peter had lunch with an old government acquaintance, the much-missed Charles Cox, who was boss of the UK branch of US presidential candidate Ross Perot's Electronic Data Systems. They had been winning huge contracts to digitise British government back-office functions. Charles explained how his workforce needed to learn about their new customer, government. Peter explained how he had a cohort of hungry young ones who knew government from many different angles. A joint seminar followed, and at the resulting drinks, one of our number, the enterprising Fergal McGovern, got talking to EDS's head of government affairs, Mal George, telling him that he really needed to sponsor us. She probably did. Peter and I knew that this was A, unusual. A multi-billion-dollar American IT company sponsoring a history seminar in the East End. And B, would cause some issues at the university. All was well when the level of sponsorship began at £200 per seminar. When after 4 years I managed to turn that into £100,000 per year, interest was piqued. Commercial support in academia was not without its difficulties, but crucially the then principal of QM, Professor now Sir Adrian Smith, and its chair of council, now Dame Colette Bow, thought it brilliant. And this was part of the reasoning why I was made Associate Director of Corporate Affairs at QM alongside my teaching. Personally, I thought the business partnership was really important for 2 reasons. First, the Prof was anti-funding council sponsorship on principle, thinking funding councils not fast nor flexible enough. And so I needed to find new income streams if our initiative was to survive and indeed thrive. And second, this was true, demonstrable, count the dollars impact. For these reasons, I've been so proud of our commercial sponsorship, which has now topped a total of £2.5 million, and pay true homage to our friends who saw the value and made it happen, including Craig Wilson and Sir Bill Thomas of EDS, then Hewlett-Packard, Tice Brooke of HP Inc., John Midgley of Amazon Web Services, and last but certainly not least, James Johns, who links all these companies and his current one workday. Thank you. That money has been very well spent on hospitality, supporting our convivial networking events, but mostly on research. By 2008, the founding Meg doctoral researchers had left one by one, with me the last one standing. There was one event where I greeted attendees, chaired the event, poured the after drinks, and organised the dinner. Slightly frenetic, not particularly pleasant, for me at least, and totally untenable. Part of the big jump in sponsorship came because I hatched a plan. For the Meg to survive, I needed people. EDS agreed to pay for 4 students to do their masters and work for me part-time, with speedy delegation of significant responsibility and each building their own networks. Over 30 Mile End Group assistants, Megas, and Strand Group assistants, Sigmas, I can see several in the audience, have now been through the initiative, with them subsequently heading into academia, the civil service, local government, journalism, government affairs, banking, and even becoming parliamentary candidates. And most of these seriously bright men and women were from academically non-traditional backgrounds, supporting our fervent belief that ability is to be found everywhere. Inclusiveness, regardless of social circumstance or ability to pay, is a key component of all we have ever done. We could not be prouder of them all, and we are absolutely delighted that this is a growing dimension of our work. In 2014, I joined King's College London. There'd been a well-trodden path from QM to KCL, usually at higher managerial level. Professor Fagan was one who came just after me. Others included Professors Evelyn Welsh and Jeremy Jennings, who reached Senior Vice Principal and Head of the School of Politics and Economics, respectively. Jeremy in particular saw so much opportunity for King's to really make a name for itself regarding the study of government, and a way to allow me and my team to thrive on a bigger canvas. So, after tremendous soul searching, I decided that King's would be the right move, and so it has proved. I thought I'd never leave QM, just 3 miles from where I'd been born, in an East End becoming fashionable for the first time, and in a college I knew inside and out. But a change of management led to differences over the direction and pace of my ambition. Things are rarely smooth and easy when one is trying something new. I had a view and I stuck to it. King's was a big challenge. As Sir Mark Allen, a member of the Meg board and former SIS officer, put it, you've built something special in the rarefied terroir of the East End, but can you do it among the competition at the very centre? Mark has a way of getting to the point. So we lifted and shifted the Mile End Group, and in a multi-million-pound makeover, renamed it the Strand Group. My last QM team followed me to King's and are all doctors now, Jack Brown, Michelle Clement and Ashley Sweetman. Another former Mega, Martin Stolliday, soon rejoined as the first staff member. Right now we are joined by 2 doctoral candidates, Yupchan Gokchen, researching the institutional history of the Ministry of Defence. My old JP Morgan colleague, Chetan Patel, currently close to completing the history of Bank of England independence, and soon by Sean Cleary, who will begin a history of British digital policy in the autumn, with more on the way. The pipeline is flowing. Collaboration and a team ethos have always been a key aspect of my approach. But I'm sure I was not the first history doctoral student to feel at times isolated and lonely. There is an unavoidable and to be embraced side of deep solo research that often leads to resilience and personal growth, not to mention clarity and sometimes magical enlightenment. So I began to ameliorate what I and others were feeling by gathering fellow students and outside friends for frequent get-togethers. Peter described me as the social secretary. This evolved into a support network for doctoral researchers where they become integral members of our group. For me, the unavoidable sole trader component of research is best complemented by a supported team, while the sum being greater than the parts allows you to think and act on a much bigger scale. Another aspect I think important is that I've always found it highly useful to be abreast of what government and associated groups think of higher education policy. Lord Willett's 2011 white paper in particular, helped by his then special advisor Nick Hillman, another former student of Lord Hennessy's, stood out to me as a beacon of forward thinking and relevance. In 2012, I received an email from the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, Sir Nicholas Macpherson. I was being invited into the mythical, powerful, really quite secret Treasury. I almost stood to attention. Thanks. Nick explained how he was concerned that rapid staff turnover had undermined institutional memory, something acutely felt during the financial crisis of 2007 to 2009. How he had asked around the country but found no university offering anything approximating to what he needed. That he thought some form of demystifying and openness was probably necessary. In essence, what he wanted was for history to return to the Treasury, and that no one had bitten on this tremendous offer. "I'll buy," I said. And so began the first of our multi-purpose governmental partnerships. I suggested Nick give one of our events in the Treasury. "We haven't hosted a public lecture in here before, but no reason why we can't," said Nick. I asked him if he would like to guest lecture on Cab and Prem. "I think I'd like that very much." Then the big one, though not in my gift, if I could swing it, would he like to be a visiting professor? "Now there's a thought," replied Nick. Walking out of the Treasury, I called the prof from 2010 in the Lords and said, "Something extraordinary has just happened." Nick's lecture was a great success, followed by another in quick succession, and one from Sir Dave Ramsden, then Chief Economic Advisor. All this piqued my appetite. I began to plan for an accredited history of the Treasury teaching module, which got underway within a year of joining King's. Nick, whilst Permanent Secretary and after, joined the teaching panel and has been our great friend throughout. Alongside him were several others, including a supremely experienced and highly energetic senior politician who suddenly had time on his hands, the now Professor Bob, a natural teacher with a frankly awesome analytical ability who came to the first Treasury class and stayed. I must say, I've never encountered anyone who relishes marking essays quite as much as he, which was a godsend when student numbers went up exponentially during COVID. Bless you, Ed. Perhaps the most memorable class was during Ed's glorious run on Strictly Come Dancing, when he got to the Blackpool week and called into the class with voice cameos from Anton Jabek and Katja Jones. The History of the Treasury bespoke teaching module, helmed by me as the academic, with Macpherson Balls and other VIP practitioners, including former chancellors, is a blend of theory and practice, academic and practitioner, which delivers moments when the special guests combine to create a breathless experience. The class is enhanced by the Treasury deciding to send hundreds of officials now to learn their institutional memory and create a blended student cohort. This Treasury teaching continues and is joined by executive education, which will be rolled out to other departments in the coming years. Learning the lessons of contemporary history, there are moments when it all becomes eerily relevant. How the various dashes for growth always come proper. Teaching about the time when Dennis Healey returned from Heathrow to handle the IMF crisis in 1976, at the very same time that Kwasi Kwarteng was flying into Heathrow from an IMF meeting to his own crisis. And during the Liz Truss witch hunt, when I was called by the BBC to see if my class was where Treasury officials learn Treasury orthodoxy, I quietly said, "This is where they learn history." Another initiative straddled the QM King's years. Back in 2008, the Prof had just bequeathed Cab and Prem to me, having been his seminar teacher for the previous 7 years. At the same time, the QM History Department put out a call for new special subjects, which formed half of an undergraduate's final year with 4 essays, an exam, and a 10,000 words dissertation. Truly thorough academic history. Through the MEGS network, work, I'd got to know John Rentoul of The Independent on Sunday, and biographer of Tony Blair, and together we saw a niche in bringing academic balance to the study of Blair as Prime Minister. Fuelled by the recent publication of Alistair Campbell's first volume of primary evidence diary extracts, and using all the contacts we could muster, we created what has been described as ultra-contemporary history. When John persuaded Alistair to one of the classes, not only did he bring a Newsnight camera crew who were profiling him, but the clamour across the university to be a guest in the class was eye-opening. We were told that Blair himself found all this intriguing and subsequently agreed to guest on the class. And John wrote the classes up for The Independent, gaining wide coverage. It all led to me being shortlisted for the Times Higher Education's Most Innovative Teacher in 2010. At the Grosvenor Hotel, the Master of Ceremonies, Michael Portillo, read out the nominations in front of over 1,000 people and loudly proclaimed, "Next is Jon Davis for the Blair government." Huh? And I walked away a loser. In 2019, John and I published Heroes or Villains, the Blair Government Reconsidered, largely based upon the many special guests who came to the class, which was then the basis for the BBC Two's 5-part documentary series. Leading this module nowadays is Dr. Michelle Clement, herself risen from Cab and Prem undergraduate. These classes are complex to organise and teach, rooted in the academic tradition, practically infused, fascinating, exciting and fun. 2 years after joining King's, we imported Cab and Prem after it was discontinued at QM, promoted it to postgraduate level, and this time had number 10 Downing Street partner it. "We want what they've got," said the Deputy Principal Private Secretary to the Prime Minister, Ed Whiting, pointing to the success of the Treasury funds. Put the Strand Group network next to these teaching modules, and you have what I would describe as the true academic triangle. Teaching, research and public engagement, mutually reinforcing each other in perfect harmony. Add that to another powerful triangle, academia, government and business, and you have the recipe for success. Which brings me to the present day. After 20 years of teaching individual modules on various MA programs, from this September, the Strand Group will launch our very own MA Government Studies, the first teaching programs offered by the Policy Institute at King's under the wise and dynamic leadership of Professor Bobby Duffy in the Policy Institute and Faculty Executive Dean Professor Linda McKee. I'm so excited. It builds upon the modules I've already mentioned, along with Dr. Brown's Wonderful London, Governing the Global City, and adds 3 all-new ones, including the history of the civil service in partnership with the Cabinet Office. Everything I've learned over the past year's teaching is being poured into this new offering. A relentless focus on making it the best it can possibly be. A relatively small cohort so that there is true partnership between teacher and student. Practically based modules that will help to propel students into the many possible jobs in or around government. A real focus on writing and communication skills. The Strand Group network will be integrated throughout. As many full-fee paid studentships from commerce and the charity sector as possible to help those who are being priced out of postgraduate study. I'm delighted to say, get your applications in as soon as possible. The places are filling up. And all this is focused upon British central government, which in recent years fell to a new nadir during the Boris Johnson and Liz Truss premierships. They embarrassed themselves and the country as a whole. I've heard it time and again from fellow lecturers up and down the country that the study of prime ministers and the higher conduct of British government has become unfashionable by those who categorise it elitist and old-fashioned, with funding for younger academics drying up. For sure, it's easier to explore the arcane and the esoteric rather than compete in a crowded and competitive arena. We're doing our best to counter that with new research on big topics of real relevance. I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking we need to try to help government leadership even... I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking we need to try to help improve government leadership even in a modest way. I'm encouraged in that thought by the architects of the great cathedrals of old, who designed such magnificence to be built over 50, 60, 70 years and more in the certain knowledge they would not see their completed creation. We have to try. Alongside this new MA programme, there are several other spaces that we will increasingly move into, which I've touched on. First, more partnerships, which we've always embraced, and which will include ones with more universities and other Whitehall departments. Second, a greater emphasis on executive education. And third, a new Centre for Digital Policy in collaboration with the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. Organic and ambitious growth, my favourite kind. Look, I really feel that after all these years, a new phase is opening up, and it's one we welcome, as universities come under pressure to demonstrate their worth across the board, from academic excellence to commercial viability. As Peter recently told me when I was discussing this lecture with him, if you can do something with your life that's really useful and enjoyable, you've cracked it. I hope this inaugural lecture has conveyed this. I'm so proud and grateful to be a professor in a world-class university coming from my background. We are all richer when we include those from the widest possible catchment and need to do so much more to encourage and make welcome those not from privilege. Certainly, I am humbled by the burgeoning number of working-class students who quietly whisper to me how I have inspired them. And I will continue to try to change the dictionary definition of the word academic to relevant. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, as respondent, we have Dr. Simon Case.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Michelle. It's a real honour to be asked to give this short response to Jon's inaugural lecture, and I hope I can speak on behalf of all of his friends and colleagues, including the many visiting professors and fellows, when I say we're all so very proud of what Jon has achieved in his career to date, both at Queen Mary and over the last decade here at King's. The support that Jon has enjoyed from people right across academia, government and business speaks not just to Jon's character, that effervescence and that curiosity that we all know so well, but also to the vital nature of what Jon is dedicated to, of what he's achieving with colleagues here. The role of history in our society and government has always been important. But as we face the shifting sands of our future, it's even more essential that we value and engage in an honest, open-minded exploration of our recent history. The philosophy of the Strand Group, previously the Mile End Group, and the associated teaching, as Jon said, is the present incarnation of a movement started by Peter Hennessy. As many of you will have seen from your own experience, the group and classes brings together those practitioners in academia, government and business to improve our understanding of our past and through that our present and our future in that engaging and multidisciplinary way. And forgive me for my tone as I say this, when studying that shared political history, the group and the teaching does not seek to learn through the artificial models in so much of political science, but rather studying the real lived examples in history, as Jon said, often with the people who lived through it, and a range of people who can bring different perspectives to that exploration. This function, seemingly a simple human act of bringing people together, can create that real magic. And as simple as it may seem, we should not underestimate the value of trying to bring people together to build bridges in our understanding of what's happening at the borderlines between academia, government, business, and society. Progress is built on our understanding of ourselves and what matters. So what Jon is doing, what many of you here are part of, is not just for fun, even though it is fun. It's an indispensable historical grounding for a nation. It's one of the reasons there has been such a long-standing partnership between the civil service and the Strand Group, started by Nick. We put our people through courses like the history of the Treasury and the history of the Prime Minister, because we know that what a nation cannot and should not do is detach itself from its own understanding of its history As any nation sifts through the memories of its past, it remembers, maybe even rediscovers, those purposes, connections, and discomforts which may have formed its vital synapses. If we value our liberal democracy, we must value the understanding that comes from the serious exploration of our history as one of the pillars that holds up that precious concept. History helps us to find a balance between continuity and change, as our late Queen put it. To borrow from FDR, there is a mysterious cycle in human events, and we must learn from cycles of the past as we peer forward to our rendezvous with destiny. Before I close, I would like to pay particular tribute to those who've inspired Jon's journey. Many of us have enjoyed joining Jon along the way, but those who lit the original sparks deserve our particular thanks. As Jon has already mentioned, each step along his way after the age of 16 was new to the Davis family. Even so, his parents, Malcolm and Tricia, have supported him on the way, driven by their own instinctive feel for the value of what Jon was contributing to society and better government. Their pride in his achievements has always been clear, and those achievements in significant part belong to them. There is, of course, one other who grabbed hold of Jon at Queen Mary alongside many of us and ignited the afterburners. Like we were a fleet of the Vulcan bombers he so adores, preparing to launch from the runway. The giant on whose shoulders Jon has rightly stood is, of course, the Prof, properly Lord Professor Peter Hennessy. Peter paved the way for all of this. He has inspired countless people along the way, his students, his colleagues, politicians, civil servants, members of the armed forces, and so many of the general public, both here and overseas. So many of us owe so much to Peter. And I can say with absolute certainty that Peter is enormously proud of what Jon has done with the start that he, Peter, encouraged. But you don't need to take it from me. I shall let the great man speak for himself.
Looking back, life is very often a series of deals. And the deal I did with Jon was unspoken until this moment, actually. And it's this. In return for him teaching me about the emotional geography of West Ham United and its extended family, I had a go at introducing him to the intricacies of post-war British history and cabinet government. It's a deal that's done very well for both of us and has endured. Simon put it very well when he described Jon's gift and indeed his appetite for patrolling borders. And Jon is a natural when it comes to the jagged edge between breaking history, the breaking story of the day, and history itself, which for Jon, as I think for me too, and perhaps for many in the room here today, begins with tomorrow morning's newspapers. And it suits his temperament down to the ground because his intense interest in current affairs meets his instinct for setting it in context and background, and integrating it into the wider frame of the history of our country since 1945, and indeed earlier. And Jon's special gift is enthusiasm combined with application that plays out in terms of his feel for the paper archive, the National Archives, memoirs, written records generally, and the human archive. He's always been absolutely brilliant at persuading people to come and talk to him and his team and his students. So the whole effect is to bring it alive for his students and for the people who read his works and his books. And he's only young, he's got 2 more decades at least of this to go. And as Simon said, I'm very proud of him as having been his teacher at undergraduate and master's level and supervisor of his PhD. The zest and application he brings to his work are contagious. And Jon, without being gushy about it, you know how much we all appreciate it. And just carry on for another 2 decades or more, and we'll watch your progress, in my case with deep affection and very deep pride. Thanks for everything, Jon.
What a magnificent testimonial from our Prof Hennessy, the godfather of what we do, and what insightful and instructive reflections from Simon. I understand we have a few comments / questions from the audience. Rachel? Professor Rachel Mills?
So I get to ask the first question as your boss's boss's boss. And also I'm a senior vice president academic, and I guess it's been a delight getting to know you over the last 18 months. And what a fabulous lecture. We're so proud to have you here at King's, and we love this new MA in Government Studies. So my question is, thinking about your new generation of students on this MA, what personal advice would you give them as they navigate an uncertain future, using the skills you've talked about? What advice would you give these new MA students going out there into this world?
It's a really interesting question. Off the top of my head, I think that the first thing I would say is don't reject the madness of social media, but take it calmly. It is absolutely a part of what we do now. It's absolutely a part of every day. But so are the books and the memoirs and the National Archives. And so I think it's that sense of absolutely embracing the new that is unavoidable, but tempering it with the skills of old.
I'd add to that, if I may.
No.
Because I was in my 20s when I first met Jon, and he did give me advice when I had other alternative things to pursue, and you said be led by opportunities rather than money as much as you can, and that served me very well.
I'm certainly on the money front.
I understand we've got another question from Dame Colette Bow.
Thanks very much. I want to say two things. First of all, as former chair of the council at Queen Mary, I want to echo what Peter Hennessy has said, Jon, and thank you for everything you did for Queen Mary through the Myland Group. Delighted that it's been transplanted down the road to King's, but thanks for everything. You made a fantastic contribution to the life of that university, so thank you so much on behalf of all of us. And I know there are many in the room tonight who are old colleagues in Queen Mary, so thank you for that. Now, I've got a question, Jon, which is a sort of pedagogic. You've obviously got a mix of students who are either, as you've described them, students who are coming and progressing through from being undergraduates into the teaching you're doing. Plus, there are other people who are coming here with Whitehall experience. Do you ever sort of mingle them for teaching purposes? And if so, how does that work when you've got people with very different experience in the room trying to come to terms with what you're teaching? Thank you.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you. I think that the best way I can answer that is to just give you a bit of a description. You saw a glimpse of it where Michelle was wandering around the classroom in the video earlier. That was, I think, our IMF case study day, whereby, for those of you who don't know this, in 1976, under great financial pressure, there was the government of the day under Jim Callaghan very nearly fell, being pulled apart within 6 years, 5 years. Labour would formally split anyway, and you could see the cracks emerging
in that cabinet. And what we do is we divide the groups up. So one group is the Callaghan group, one group is the Healy group, another group is the Tony Crosland group, the other group is the Tony Benn group, and we often ask Sir Nick if he would advise the Tony Benn group. And what you do is you break up the class. It's one of the first times where you get King's students actually properly engaging with Treasury and Cabinet officials. And what we get is just this most wonderful. You don't get this divide. It's all mixed, and people are bringing. One set are history students, so they're all putting it into historical context. Others are going, well, I'm seeing that problem right now at the moment in my day job. And so actually, I was talking about that exhilaration that you sometimes get in these classes. When you get people stand up, we got a bit frightened for one Treasury official during COVID. She was in a coffee shop and with her great big headphones on, standing up and shouting out, "I am Tony Crosland," and you're like, you feel that she's in danger there. So actually, Colette, I think that on one time, come along and see it. It's really quite lovely.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Thank you. James Johns?
John, that was fantastic. I really enjoyed that very much, and Simon's response as well. I've got a question for both of you, if I may. You kind of successfully created that amazing combination that you talked about in London, that you've sort of seen at Oxford colleges. The civil service and government, of course, is something that's spread right across the whole of the country. I just wondered if you could reflect a little bit on what you think the opportunities are for taking the model you've created here and planting that in other universities around the country, so that people from backgrounds where it does facilitate them coming to London to university can get that same experience.
Yeah, okay. I'll answer first, and I'm sure that you've got a comment on that as well. So, as you know, one of our visiting professors is Catherine MacLeod. Catherine was special advisor to Alistair Darling when he was Chancellor, a great friend of Nick's. And Catherine would come to our class, and as a very proud Highlander, she would say, "Look, this is great, I love it," in very hard accent, and would say, "But we need to see this north of the border, because the Treasury is not just for London, it's not just for England." And so, as you'll recall, we did quite, one of the great Strand Group events in partnership with the University of Edinburgh, about a week after Liz Truss fell, where Lord Macpherson gave his topic, "Treasury Orthodoxy, Fact or Fiction?" As you can read this, and you'll see just what fun he had in giving that a week after it went wrong, right? Now, the key to all of this is that we love partnerships. Martin and I were guests of Newcastle University last week. Why? Because 3 years ago, Simon, I said to Simon, "Are you going to give a lecture?" And he went, "Yeah, I think I will." And I said, "All right, well, look, any time, And he went, "Great, I don't want to do it in London." I went, "Brilliant." And he went, "But I would like to do it in partnership with you." And you go, "Okay." He said, "Anyone you know?" And I went, "Well, actually, I was invited to give a lecture at Newcastle University, and they were brilliant. They were swish." We went there. It was excellent. He gave his lecture. And what happened was that the VC was talking to Simon, saying, "How do we carry this on? We need to be connected much more." And so, academic wheels don't often turn fast. And so 3 or 4 years later, we got invited. They've been having conversations. They've come down and seen us, and who knows what will happen from there. And conversations going on elsewhere. We did a lecture in partnership with Bristol University with Evelyn Welsh a year or so ago. So we're really happy with this. We like this. We feel comfortable with it. And I think more than anything else, you're seeing, obviously, government is really devolving. One of the things that me and my team do, we go and deliver 2 days a year training on institutional memory to the Treasury's economic campus in Darlington. And so this is an evolving process, and it's certainly one that we welcome.
I mean, I don't have much to add. I suppose this sort of John's given you a hint. Sort of watch this space. The franchise model discussions are underway, and maybe everyone will be millionaires by Christmas.
Great. I think if I'm allowed to, I'll have the final question. And you know, I've been sort of ringside for the past sort of 15 years, seeing Jon, you know, grapple with this journey that you've been on. And you know, you spoke about the sole trader, and you spoke about the network that you wanted to create. But I know it's been really hard at different times. And I just wanted to, you know, in the spirit of sort of sharing lessons learned, get you to reflect a little bit on how you kept going. And obviously you've got a brilliant team. You know, not doing all the work, but yeah, how did you keep going? Because you know, it's not easy. There's nothing in academia that has incentivised the approach you've taken. The incentives are generally, at least historically, have been about sole trader, create something for a particular research grant, then create another thing. You've continued at this for 20 years.
Tough question, and you'll pay for it later. Interesting.
How do you pick your battles?
If you can't pick your battles, you try and pick the times. I think that it's fair to say that when you have an evening like this, the rewards are clear to see. And all of the lovely things that I've been involved in and that have been bestowed on me in recent years, it's suddenly flown, you know. And so you can't really sort of like talk about struggle too much. People have real struggles, you know, everything in context. I think that that's important. I really do believe this, you know, every time that I think to myself, you know, like, it's been a hard week or something, I think back to my dad who was working on the tools 7 days a week. 7 days a week. That's hard work. I worked on a building site for 6 months next to him as well. So that's the first thing. Second thing I'd say is, how do you keep going? I am surrounded, and it's largely because of my choice, by superb people. You and Jack and Martin and Jen and Jan, all the rest of them. I know, I mean, on occasions, you ever want to go into battle, you want her next to you, because she whispers and goes, your team is with you. Right? And she's sort of like, you know, like, fist is ready, you know. But it's true, You know, the joy, the happiness, the fun, the irreverence, but then the moments when you turn on the engine and it just purrs and it works. So I think that is the most important thing. And then the last thing I'd say is, you know, I think I bring in the banking experience because very early on, it taught me what I didn't want to do in life. And so on several occasions, Simon has said to me, you can be a bit too loyal, you know, Jon. And for me, I look back and go, I'm not being that loyal, I just know how bad it is over there. That's all. But yeah, look, all I can say is, and I'm sure you can sense it as well, the joy that I get from this. And can I say, you all coming out, I'm really touched. Thank you.
Right. That really was quite something. Thank you for sharing some of your remarkable journey, showing us kind of what's behind the magic a little bit there. Please join us for a reception afterwards, downstairs in the arcade. And please join me in thanking and congratulating our Professor Jon Davis.